Welcome to Prose from the Underground, coming to you from my basement in northern Michigan, where I read, write, think, and say things, and quite often I get to talk to someone. Tonight I got to talk to Fleda Brown, a mighty poet and prose writer whom I have been reading for years. Here's the thing, I like it when writers are willing to theorize, and by that I mean they're willing to define their terms for us. What is poetry? What is the lyrical essay? What is humanity, mortality, hope? Fleda's willing to discuss such things openly. And here's a confession. When I lived in Ohio, I took her collection, The Woods Are on Fire, with me to the gym almost every night until it was uncarryable. I would put that thing on the hamster wheel in front of me, and I would read as many poems as I could. Because Fleda's poems, and as it turns out her prose, do something for me that's critical. They walk me to the edge of what I'm supposed to know, or what I'm allowed to know. They're brazen, almost treacherous in their riskiness and focus. As you'll see, Fleda's soft-spoken, unassuming, but don't let it fool you. Her work reads, as treacherously and brazenly as, say, a Mad Max film if it were written by Cormac McCarthy and Sophocles. That's one of the feelings I get when I'm inside her work. I hope you enjoy this discussion. It's rather heady in places, and I think it's a boatload of fun. So I want to know if there's something going on in that book, or if there's something going on with the genre itself when you're writing essays that allows you or compels you to take on some question and just tear open thinking without giving some kind of answer. I don't feel like there's an answer in these books or in those chapters, but it's just a consistent kind of open wonderment. What do you do with that, Fleda?
Well, to start with, if I had any answers, I'd give them to you. But that reason the essays have no answers is that I don't think there are any answers. So, but as far as tearing open, it's really interesting about prose and, say, poetry, that prose, for me, it's like I'm wandering around all over the landscape and gathering up every single thing I can find to gather up, to see, not to see what it means exactly, because, it's not so much about meaning as it is about just exploring the landscape and looking at it and seeing what kind of reality is there. So I hope I tear things open. And as far as the difference between prose and poetry, at least lyric essay and poetry, I think is very fine, very delicate difference, and really sometimes not much difference at all. But it's about staying with something long enough to see what's inside it. I'm always looking up etymologies. I'm always every time I run across anything that's the slightest bit interesting, I stop and look it up. And I'm able to sound really smart sometimes.
There are so many things that you said that are worth drilling into and kicking around. But I love this notion that it's not about meaning, but what reality is there. It's ontological rather than hermeneutic or something like this. So one night I was reading one of those essays, and I thought, she's kind of doing like an odd hermeneutic process. In other words, she's tearing open meaning and doing so emphatically. And then here you come and you're saying it's not about meaning, it's about what reality is there, which I think is far more gratifying than my first thought about that. What reality is there? And if folks read Mortality, and they should, they'll see that the etymological stuff that you do, you ask a question about a word, you go chasing after that word, that's the process that I guess keeps uncovering layers in layers and you stay with it. Do you find it, do you have to remind yourself to come back to square one or some initial sort of question or curiosity that launched the essay?
Yeah, I do. I don't know if it's so much remind myself, but I certainly always, but it's the same thing with a poem. I get too launched into outer space, and at some point I need to pull back and put my feet on the ground again. But it's outer space and feet on the ground are kind of two poles of the same thing. And so I probably do have to remind myself to come back, but I really like reality. I mean, I think reality is where, that's where all the good stuff is.
That's the t-shirt that we should all wear. I really like reality. That's where all the good stuff is. Nice. Well, what's really compelling too is there are some fiction writers who talk about that polarity. Here we are on the ground, you go zooming off into some abstract land, outer space as you call it, and then come swooping back to Earth. And so you're doing that certainly in the prose work. Do you think that same kind of tension or impulse happens in your poetry?
Yeah, but kind of in a different way. When I'm working on a poem, it looks like I'm sort of looking for the gaps. I'm looking for the holes. Instead of thinking about or paying much attention to the whole issue of reality, I think I'm sort of opening the cracks between it to see what might be there. And that sounds so esoteric. And frankly, I have no idea what I mean. I only know that when I'm doing it, I'm very pleased if there's a crack that opens up. And if it opens up into something that is inexpressible in words, then that's when I'm really happy. And that you can't make that happen. You just get the words down, and then once in a while you look at it and you say, wow, that really bored into something I didn't even know was there. And I can't really even quite express it, but I'm really happy that it happened.
Let me just ask this very directly, since we're playing on the margins of this question anyway. What does a prose book, and I'll put it that way, allow you to do that poetry doesn't? In other words, I'm imagining, what if Mortality with Friends were a poetry collection? Instead, you wrote a prose collection. What do you think that allowed you to do that poetry wouldn't have?
Maybe it's back to the first answer I was struggling with there, which is it allows me to look at the whole landscape. It opens up a whole landscape for me. I mean, I'm able to look backwards. You can do that in a poem. It's not that you can't do that, but you're kind of on a tether. You're very deliberately on a tether with poems, because what you're trying to do is sort of open up the space. And like say that essay, the title essay, Mortality with Friends, I was looking for the landscape. I was asking people who've had cancer, how is this for you? And so I wanted to explore the whole landscape, which feels really different from, I mean, I couldn't have written a poem about that. It's just different material.
Got it. I'm reminded again of what happens when reading your prose, and I'll have to think more if the same kind of thing happens when I'm reading your poetry. But there's no answer. You forget the question that you started with, and you just keep opening up into a bigger and bigger reality, which is really gratifying. I end each essay, each chapter with a sense of wonder, which is really, I think, helpful for a fiction writer. I read Fleda Brown's work because it keeps me on the edge of what I think I'm supposed to know, which is I think super helpful for me, anyway, I hope it's helpful for others. Let me just ask now, you have a huge body of poetic work in the world. You have prose in the world. Here it is, August of 2022. What are you doing next?
Well, I have another book of poems that I'm starting to shop out there, but I don't know. I'm tentative about right now. The title is A Poet's Guide to Quantum Physics, and I'm a little uncertain whether that's going to fly as it is, but it felt just absolutely right for me. But anyway, that's sitting there about to do something, and so I'm just kind of, once again, in limbo. I spend so much of my life just kind of in limbo, not knowing what's going to happen next. But that seems to be, that sort of dipping into the trough of the slough of despond is sort of the way I have to work. That's just what happens. I'm writing a few poems, just sort of here and there, and nothing that excites me too much. But so, yeah, that's what I'm doing.
That's great. Two quick follow-up questions. First of all, did you read some quantum physics over the past months?
Oh, sure. Of course.
All
Yes.
right.
Yes, I got really interested in the story of Alexander Grothendieck, who was a physicist, and I wrote the longest poem I've ever written about him and his life. So yeah, I did a lot of that.
Great. Well, I look forward to that. I'm a big fan got into a dark matter jag a few years ago, and wow, that's a heck of a hole to go down. You once said, which I think of often, I asked you if you'd been writing often or whatever. I ask you, how's the writing going or something, and you said with a sigh, you said, I haven't been bored enough lately, as a way of saying I haven't been as productive as I want as a poet, because you need to be bored apparently to write poetry. Or that's how you felt at the time. Have you been bored enough over the summer?
Maybe not. We had this big move, and now we're at the lake, and then we have grandchildren coming. So I'm afraid I'm not going to be bored for a while, but actually that's okay. I don't know. I've never quite figured out, and I don't know, maybe you have the same issue. I've never quite figured out the right rhythm. It's always not quite the right rhythm. Either I'm too busy with other stuff, or the space stretches out in front of me and I feel just kind of panicked at that. What'll I do with this space? Am I going to be able to make good use of it? And so it just kind of swings back and forth.
I'm gratified that Fleda Brown feels that tension, because that's absolutely how I felt now for about 800 years of my life anyway.
Yeah.
One or the other. Fleda, I'm so glad that you took the time to come here. We're all going to get out and read Mortality with friends, and then everything before that.
Thanks, John.